Hi, William. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me, John.
My pleasure. So, first of all, tell us a little bit about yourself and who you are and why you write.
Well, I was born in Baghdad, Iraq, and I came to the United States at age 10. And I started writing. I knew I wanted to be a writer when I was 19 years old, and I started pursuing it. What I wasn't as aware of is that my books and my topics are going to be centered around my background, my heritage, which I'm Chaldean. Chaldeans are Christian Iraqis. They're Neo-Babylonians who today still speak Aramaic, the language of Jesus. And their history dates back thousands of years. Now, before I came to the United States, I knew I was Chaldean. I didn't know what that meant though, because it's a minority group. It wasn't a minority in the past, and so my focus became that because I saw that my readers were really enjoying it. Well, it started first with my editors and the publishers and the agents. Everybody was kind of intrigued by this. I didn't think it was a big deal, but seeing the response, and then by writing about these topics, I kind of did start to better know my background, my culture, my heritage, how it has been destroyed over time. The 2003 Iraq War influenced me in a way where my book started becoming more nonfiction. And then what really did it is when ISIS destroyed the villages of my ancestors where my parents and grandparents were born. And then it became kind of like, well, I just really felt a sense of responsibility to focus on books that had to do with true, for the most part, true books that had to do about the Iraqi Chaldean experience. And in order for them to reach a larger population, I started doing movies. So my recent book, Little Baghdad, is my 15th book. I wrote the book, won an Eric Hoffer Award, and the documentary with the same title, The Great American Family, won 2 international awards. We just completed production on a feature film called Pomegranate, which was selected quarterfinalist by Francis Coppola's Zoetrope. So we just started submitting it to film festivals.
You did mention that you switched to nonfiction. So you were writing fiction originally, your first few books?
Yes, but to be honest, they were like from characters that I knew they were somewhat autobiographical. So
Mhm.
I wasn't going that far off from the community, but they were not pure memoir. They were not pure nonfiction or creative nonfiction. And so they they were fiction, but they were based on Chaldean families and just a story revolving around that. And especially in the beginning, what people were attracted to is what our culture was about. It dispelled the stereotypes of how Middle Easterners all are. You know, they're normally placed under one umbrella of being women being, you know, veiled or oppressed and men being a certain way. And then it's all like revolves around war and oppression to the point where you don't really get to know who the people of Iraq are. And
Exactly.
so I decided just to, and I'll tell you why I made that decision, by the way. So I was on a transit, I was in Europe with a friend, and on our way back to the United States, we were on a transit in England at Heathrow Airport. And I went into this bookstore and I saw a rack of books written by Western authors who all had a veiled woman on the cover. When I read the synopsis on the back, it was either the woman was running away either from an abusive husband, father, brother. Somehow she was oppressed, she was veiled, she was under threat. And those were all the stories, and all the names of the authors were non Middle Eastern authors. That was disturbing for me because I that day I felt like, is this really what people, that's how they view us? Because I had no idea. I thought like looking how I am, talking how I am, I'm very open with people. So I had no idea the impression the general public might have about us. And so when I got home, I started doing a lot of research to see what books represented not, I'm not looking like for a positive or a negative, just a more realistic and authentic stories out there. I found none. So at that point, I made a decision that my work would be as close to reality as possible in order to provide that representation of authentic books, because I saw that there was a real void there. And so that indicated, before that, all I wanted to do was be a writer and write and just share my stories. But that point, I made a very distinct decision that I would be very authentic in my work, and that became very important for me. So it's like the good, the bad, the ugly, all mixed together, not one or the other, not having any kind of political agenda in my work. So luckily, it was from my first book that I was able to present that story. When I was at Heathrow Airport, I hadn't gotten any of my books. My first book was published in 2004. So this was before that. This was in the mid 1990s that I was at Heathrow Airport when that happened. So I was still formulating my career and my stories. And it actually probably was a good thing that I saw that, because it gave me, we talk about writers not knowing what to write, or writers feeling like trying to tackle different subjects and maybe going all over the place. And some people are successful jumping from different topics. But in my case, it created a very solid understanding of what I wanted to write about, what I was going to pursue. And who really helped me is my editors, my American editors who I was working with, my teachers, my writers groups. They felt the same way. They were seeing what I might have not even seen as much, the richness behind my history, the richness behind my culture. And they were very supportive of me pursuing these stories. So the combination of being at Heathrow Airport and seeing that, and the responses I was getting by my readers, made me feel like, okay, this is my track. That's where I'm going to pursue.
Well, you've got me very interested. 15 books. We've covered sort of the 15th one, the most recent one. Can you just run through the titles? They're all available, are they not?
Yes, they're all available. And Pomegranate, the one that just we're submitting the film to film festivals, is the only one that has an audiobook, but they're all available in print and ebooks. And the very first title of my very first book is called The Feminine Art. And I have a book called Mesopotamian Goddesses. So Mesopotamian Goddesses, I was asked to speak at the Theosophical Society. My niece was president there, and she asked me to speak. And she said, I've read here and there some writings that you write about women. Particularly, I always bring up Enheduanna, the first writer in recorded history. So she was a princess, a priestess, and a poet. And she was the daughter of King Sargon. And when I came across, I was an adult and I was doing research. I'm a journalist as well. I was doing a research on this topic, and then I came across her name, and I thought, like, I made a mistake. Like, is this they're saying she's from Mesopotamia? And I kept researching, and I realized she's from the region where I'm from. And why isn't she known? Well, her disc was discovered in 1927 by the British archaeologists. And when I say that she's the first recorded writer, because traditionally before Enheduanna, before her time, when scribes, they wrote on tablets, they did not sign their names. And in her case, she wanted to know who the author of her poem was. So at the end of the poem, she would cite, "It is I, Enheduanna, who wrote this, something my king has never done before." So she was making history, and that's what she wanted to do. So my niece asked me to speak about women in ancient Mesopotamia. Well, I said, okay, well, I'm not going to just speak about her. I'm sure there's other legendary women. Lo and behold, I start doing research and come across all these characters, many of whom I didn't know have roots in Mesopotamia, including like Ishtar, Inanna, and many others. There's Kobaba, the first Sumerian queen that was part of Mesopotamia, and just so many queens, like the queen of the goddess of medicine, and they all had, the males and the females had consorts. So they were they were always in a marriage with male and female.
That's right.
And honestly, like when you read, there was such beautiful poetry during that time. There was less war, and there was more equality between the feminine and masculine energies that would happen in society. So I found it very intriguing. And then it became a long, I would say like a year and a half of putting this book together, of research. But it was very enthralling, because that's what I love about my work, is that part of it allows me to investigate and learn more about my ancestors. Mm-hmm. And part of it is new to readers, but it's also being new to me, and I'm discovering it as I'm writing it.
Right. So how do you go about doing your research?
Well, I think I'm really in love with whatever comes up into my community. So for instance, right now I'm writing a book called, that's the subtitle, My Native American Friend. And so basically it's the conversations that I have between me and a Native American friend whom I met like over 30 years ago. And over the years, I have attracted a lot of Native Americans to my door. When I say that, we had a video store. This is where I learned. This was my first film school before I went to film school, was this video store that I ran for 12 years. When there were VHS tapes, that's I remember film, when these were VHS, that I remember when customers would bring them back and they were like chewed up. I would literally, like I was a VHS doctor, I would unopen the top, right, splice them, tape the thing together, and it would look brand new. I was so proud. Right. I'd have people line up like watching me fix these VHS.
I think I knew somebody like you once. Yeah.
Yeah. It was because I wouldn't fix them right away unless it was a new release. Then they had to be fixed right away. But otherwise, they would be stacked. So when the time came to fix them, and somebody would notice that, and they'd all stand in line, because you had to be really delicate. Otherwise, you're going to ruin the beginning of the movie. And so they would come to my workplace, the Native Americans, one of them became my teacher. And I loved him so much. He's passed away since. He was an elderly man. This one is an older man as well, but he is not a teacher in that sense. The other one literally had like classes, and him and his woman partner, had classes and such. And so the one who passed away, I have his memories. I've written about him. But this particular person is different, where we just have these intriguing conversations. I'm mostly the listener and he's the talker. And so what I started doing, I think the relationship as it formed, because for me, he was just a customer, is starting to understand what is the attraction between me and Native Americans. That's kind of the question became for me. So I started doing all this research to kind of figure out the answer. What do we have in common? Why? I mean, and it's not all that many Chaldeans that have that kind of relationship, but I think for me as a writer, as somebody that's digging for certain answers, and I actually found a lot of commonality, and I think it's being Native and being stripped of your land somehow, or of your religion, or, if you're endured genocides, or all these feelings. I think that's where the commonality lies, but without really talking about these things, because it's in our system, but we don't necessarily, that's not our conversations. And I love that, because sometimes we get caught up only in the negativity of the experience and don't learn to move on. And my friend and I, we don't do that. We discuss different things, and I'm curious about just hearing about things and not necessarily attaching myself to these negativities, because I went through a lot to let go of the guilt of surviving Iraq, of surviving the Ba'ath Party, of surviving the wars, not even having to go through them, like others whom I love or friends that I left behind. And it took really decades to heal from that aspect, and to let go of the guilt, and then just to embrace that it's okay that you're an American and you can enjoy being that. Yes. That you can honor your heritage, of course, that stays in you, but you can enjoy being an American and not feel that guilt that was of what you went through, of who you left behind.
Exactly. So how did this affect your writing of your 15 books? We talked about the most recent one, the one that you're in the process of writing, the first couple of books, but all those other ones that you wrote must have taken place during the recent occupation of Iraq, the consistent occupation of Iraq that still to this day goes on. Does that affect you at all with your writing?
Yeah, the 2003 war really affected me because I had just visited Iraq in 2000. So I left Iraq in 1980. I visited 20 years later in 2000 and met with my relatives. I visited during Easter for 3.5 weeks, and I visited the villages that were later destroyed. And I had a wonderful time, but I also realized that the Iraq that was in my head as a child is not the Iraq that's currently there, but still it was, and where it was is nothing like what happened to it. And so when the bombing started, and it was not just how it affected me, it was affecting our whole entire family. The 1991 war, the Gulf War, affected us because my sister was still there, and we couldn't get a hold of her. All the phones were died, all the infrastructure was destroyed, so we couldn't get a hold of her. In 2003, by then my sister was here, but we still had a lot of cousins, which for me, I was the one that had seen them the most recent, whereas the rest of the family was had more of a distance from them. It was devastating. It was devastating. It brought so much pain that I think my writing, a lot of it had a lot of healing elements. And I ended up coming across a teacher. She passed away last year. She's a best-selling author of the Medicine Women series. Her name is Lindsay Andrews. I contacted her one day because she wrote a book called Writing Spirit that really resonated with me. And from that one phone call, she was able to realize how I was affected by the culture of Iraq because it was oppressive and abusive. And then how I was affected by coming here and the cultural shock that I had to, presume here, and how you, as a minority, how it feels here. So she was able to connect to me in a way and to help me with one call that was supposed to be about my writing. So from that, I ended up in a 4-year mysticism school that she led. And it really transformed my life. And I wrote a 4-part memoir series about it called Healing Wisdom for a Wounded World, My Life-Changing Journey Through a Shamanic School. And I think that was the part that, because it was 4 years and it's based on, the wheel, the cycle of life, and, going from the south to the west, to the north, to the east, and kind of visiting the different aspect of yourself every, a whole year of full-time work. That was the final kind of really me letting go of the past and being okay to look at it, but not feeling, again, the guilt or that, just allowing the pain to wash off and just using it in a different way. And the other community that there's a lot of connection to that we have is the Jewish community, because Chaldeans were Jewish before they became Christian.
Right.
They were pagans and Jewish before they, and the Jewish community before us endured what we later endured, to the point where there was only 4 Jewish people left in Iraq. I heard last year one of them passed away, so there's 3. So imagine that whole community, which I think it was in the 1950s or 60s, was over 160,000 Jewish people. And then it dwindled down, kept dwindling down to the point where there's just a couple of them, there. So, and I think it is that experience, that the trauma and the genocide that comes along with being from a certain group.
Yeah. Do you ever get political in your writings, where you give opinions on how things ought to be, and is that something you stay away from?
What I do is, in writing the true stories, I think is I try to be balanced, because there's always two sides to the story, and I truly believe in that. So there was one political story, and that's the story that won an Eric Hoffer Award, and it's the one story I did not want to write. It was a story that I just resisted it as so much, and then finally I came on board because it was a woman that was in prison. She was half Chaldean, half from a mother that was, with no Chaldean roots. She's just American here. So she did not receive a fair trial. And so she was sentenced to prison. And after she was sentenced, it was discovered that the person that she was accused of conspiring with, who was not in the trial, turned out to be a CIA operative. And this operation was intended to listen in on Saddam, and it was a U.S. operation. So, and he said she didn't know any of this. The reason he didn't speak is because he assured her nothing is going to happen because it's a U.S. operation. He only came out, he risked his life, and he came out only after they sentenced her. Well, by then, so the prosecutor and the court just basically said, well, it's still based on the evidence. Like, they felt like they had enough evidence, even without him, his part of the story, which was she was accused of conspiring, So she still went to jail. So her mother and her brother approached me, and I didn't want to write the story. It was too political. I don't like to get into politics in that way. However, at the end, I gave in because it was a humanitarian thing. So politics have a lot of different, political, it doesn't necessarily mean a negative thing, but there's a lot of good political work being done out there. And there's some things that need to be addressed, humanitarily. So this story was like that. I was very affected by the mother-daughter relationship, because the mom felt like she was, this destroyed their life. She became very close to me and my children, and she was like a grandma to them, like a second grandma. And that dynamic, then I started getting close to the woman, her name is Dawn, in prison, and started learning about other stories about how women were being treated in prison, and how they were in there for nonviolent crimes that ended up, how it's hurting our society by these women being in these prisons. And so that story, as I wrote it, it was difficult through the whole process, just because of all the elements. And I got involved where there was so much ups and downs about her appeal. Same thing with the film. The book took me 6 years to write, and the film took 8 years. But it's the book that won, it won an Eric Hoffer Award, and I'm very proud of that. And the documentary won a couple of awards. So I'm proud of the work at the end of the day, but it was very difficult, because also, as a creative nonfiction, I had to gather all my journalism expertise at maximum to read the trials transcripts, they were over, I believe, 3 weeks. I had to read them again and again and again, just to make sure that the story is right. So it took a lot out of me, and I don't know, maybe Pomegranate might be considered a little bit political. It's this liberal young Muslim woman that's living across the street from a Christian Chaldean conservative who, one is voting for Trump and the other one is for Hillary Clinton. And these women are very smart, and they're very sassy, and they both have their points of views, and they're not afraid to speak them. Now, I wouldn't consider that political. I would just consider it reality of what we live in.
Yes, exactly. So how is sales for you? Sounds like you're doing quite well.
Well, the books are okay. I think because I write a genre that's kind of not, it's not under the romance or it's not under, certain genres. It's very particular audience. What I'm hoping though, I do would like to be more commercial for the reason that I wanted the world to learn about our culture. That was my main thing. Even when I went to film school, it was about how do I get my stories? It wasn't about to be hired as a filmmaker or a director on a movie that doesn't relate to what I do. It was about the ability to turn these movies. And, because I met with producers, I remember one time, and they said, well, who would produce a movie like this? And I thought, well, you know what? Me. Because if you're not going to know who Iraqi Americans are, you're going to end up with that same rack of books that I saw at Heathrow Airport, where you're showing this woman that's oppressed, that's this. I know what an Iraqi woman is like. So I wrote about them. And our leading cast for this movie are women. And I think because of what's happening in Iran, and even because what's happening locally here with Trump, that it's going to have that appeal, that universal appeal. I think every writer at the end of the day, rather than trying to represent anybody or trying to be political or whatever, should tell a story that anybody, when they read it, can feel who their characters and care about them. I read Gone with the Wind at age 9. At age 9, I could connect to these characters in the South that I've never set foot in the United States.
Right.
That's thanks to the author's work of bringing them to life. So if they would have came into my living room, I would have been entranced and I could have felt who they are. Yeah. That's the role of the author, not to sit there and just kind of, these stories, some of these stories are getting so horrible. Sorry, but it's true that we're trying to say something so hard and we're trying to become like the news by creating these stories. Storytellers just tell a good story.
Well said. I like stories. I like telling them, and I like hearing them. Your story is fascinating. I'm going to post, when this gets put on YouTube and Facebook, I'm going to post all your books where people can buy them. I know we didn't cover all of them, but I'm going to make sure that people will know where they could look into some of these writings that you have, because I am certain that they are fascinating.
Thank you so much, John. I really appreciate that. And I'll send you a link to the trailer. We have the trailer for both films. Yes. Thank you.
I'd like to see that. I'd like to see that too.
Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. It's been a pleasure having you on the show, William.
I appreciate you having me.
You take care of yourself now.
Sure. Bye-bye.
And that's our show for today. If you like what I do here on Tell Me About Your Book, then please hit the like button and subscribe. And don't forget to ring that bell for future notifications. And if you are a self-published author, I would really like to speak with you. Until such time, keep on writing and be kind to one another.